Back in 2011, you were in the city council. There was a referendum on the ballot to move Tulsa from a partisan closed primary system to an open nonpartisan system. You opposed it. And since then, you've become a real champion for open primaries. And I wanted to dig in there.
I'm a big believer in looking at the data, and if you're wrong, admitting you're wrong. And as you've heard me say, John, I was totally wrong. What we've seen since then is not a decrease in voter turnout, but actually an increase in voter turnout. By making that switch, we shifted the focus of the people who are the elected officials to the issues rather than what political party they happen to be in. And that has made all the difference.
Do you see this rise of independent voters, this low approval ratings, as reflective of the rules of the game, or is it purely based on other factors?
With the growth in independent voter registration, there is a desire to see government operate like a nonprofit, where people work together with a focus on outcomes and altruism and selflessness.
I'd like to know if the mayor has any thoughts on how open primaries might encourage new leaders to come into the system and retain the great ones that we love.
Mayor Holtz, Mayor of Oklahoma City, both of us have governed with this same kind of nonpartisan approach. Both of us enjoy extremely high popularity ratings in our cities, and both of us have been told that we could never win a statewide Republican primary. How you change that, again, I think is by changing the system. If you have a system which is discouraging wildly popular candidates from being able to get elected, then something is wrong with the system.
Yeah. Hey everybody, John Updike here. The mayor is running a few minutes late. He's the mayor of Tulsa. He's got mayoral duties that he's dealing with. He should be joining us in just any minute now. But wanted to just take a few minutes before we start to let you all know about a really exciting new initiative that Open Primaries has launched. It's called Let Us Vote. And all of you know the statistics about independent voters. Fastest growing segment of the electorate. You know, over 50% of young people, when they turn 18, register to vote as independents. The numbers are surging in red states, blue states, purple states, urban areas, rural areas, you name it. But one of the things that we realized is that for a lot of the media, for a lot of the pundits, independents are just statistics. They don't, you know, as I like to say, they have the numbers, but not the narrative. Independents are often just recategorized out of existence by the punditry. They say, well, there's all these independents, but really they're, you know, Democrats in disguise or Republicans in disguise. They lean Republican, they lean Democrat. And by doing so, they're able to paint a picture of an America that is still, you know, very connected to the two-party system, as opposed to tens of millions of Americans are raising their hand in protest against the constraints, the constrictures of the two-party system. So part of the motivation behind launching Let Us Vote was to create a narrative, a community, a voice for independent voters. And we're putting a lot of emphasis on talking with independents, interviewing them, organizing them to record short videos. We've taken to the streets. We sent a documentary team to Las Vegas and Reno to talk to independents in their street, in the streets, to find out, why are they independent? What do they think about the dramatic rise of independence in the country? What do they think about the culture of Democratic and Republican politics? And we kicked off the campaign. We got a nice grant from Unite America to help us do that, and wanted to show you one of the products of our man in the street outreach in Vegas and and Reno. This is just a short video we put together based on the hours of footage that we got. And we just want to play it for you briefly before we kick off our conversation with Mayor Bynum. So go ahead, Jeremy, play our new video.
Talking to independents has restored my faith in America.
Hi, I'm Victor Lara, and I am an independent voter.
I'm an independent voter.
I am an independent voter.
I'm an independent voter.
I'm an independent voter.
We are independent voters.
Independents are going to decide what's going on.
And at the end of the day, they say our vote matters. It's our opinion that's supposed to count. But if we can't independent, be strong, and sit here and figure it out, then what's the point?
Used to be, I thought a while back, there was a difference between the Republican and Democrat.
I still just don't feel like there's anyone who really represents my own personal views.
Why is it happening? Why isn't something being done about it? Why are we having this conversation as if that's the finality of it?
So I've always crossed party lines and chosen the person I think is best for the job.
I don't hold myself to two-party politics anymore. I'm pretty willing to accept people for whatever their particular platform is.
Why do you think independents should have access to voting in the primaries?
Because voting is a constitutional right, and I think they should have the right to participate in a primary.
I do firmly believe that election reform is something we desperately need in this country right now.
Political parties don't really resonate with them, right? I don't think either party at this point is really good at, are we able to make a living and the affordable housing, good jobs. I think the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, I don't even know, I kind of stopped paying attention because I don't even know what they're really focused on anymore. I really don't have, I don't really have a good idea what their, points are. It just seems like they're always negating each other, but really not focused on the things that the average American are concerned about.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. So Mayor Bynum is with us now. Just before we get into the interview, I'd encourage all of you to go to letusvote.org, check out this new initiative, record your own video. For those of you who are independent voters, share your story. We're looking to spread this campaign to all 50 states and start giving some more to humanize the millions of Americans who are raising their hand and saying, hey, don't count me as part of Team Blue or Team Red. Welcome, Mayor Bynum. So glad you could take time out of your busy day to join us. You're here with a number of people from the Open Primaries National Network. Mayor Bynum is the mayor of Tulsa. You've been the mayor since 2016. Before you served on the Tulsa City Council, and I had the privilege of being on a panel with you in Oklahoma City last fall, and was really taken aback by your honesty and openness about the fact that back in 2011, when there was initiative, you were in the city council, there was a referendum on the ballot to move Tulsa from a partisan closed primary system to an open nonpartisan system. You opposed it. And since then, you've become a real champion for open primaries. And I wanted to dig in there and really learn from you what led to your initial opposition, what changed your mind, what's been the impact in Tulsa. I know that's a big open question, but tell us about your evolution on this issue based on what you learned, how it's been impacting in Tulsa specifically.
Sure. One, I apologize for being late, and I'm honored to be able to spend some time with you all. I think the greatest threat that our country faces right now is the level of just virulent partisanship. And so to have folks across the country who are focused on finding ways for people to find common ground and to give people more options in elections, I think is crucial. Not just here in Tulsa, but all around the United States. So thank you. As you mentioned, John, I was a city councilor. I was actually the chair of the city council at the time when a initiative petition put on the ballot to change Tulsa from what we had been previously with partisan elections into a nonpartisan format where everybody is on the ballot. If somebody gets over 50% of the ballot or of the vote, it's over. If nobody gets over 50%, then the top two go on to a runoff. And I campaigned against it. I was probably the leading campaigner in opposition to it. And my thinking at the time was that the purpose of parties is to educate voters and turn out the vote. And that by switching to a nonpartisan format like was being proposed, my fear was that we would have a dramatic reduction in voter turnout because there wouldn't be parties there working to turn people out to vote. I'm a big believer in looking at the data, and if you're wrong, admitting you're wrong. And as you've heard me say, John, I was totally wrong on that. And we have seen the positive results of that in Tulsa, of that vote, which passed. Thankfully, they were better at campaigning than I was when it passed. And what we've seen since then is not a decrease in voter turnout, but actually an increase in voter turnout. And 5 years after that vote, I ran for mayor in 2016. And I would say probably as the first post-partisan candidate that we've had running for mayor in Tulsa at that time. And we had another mayoral election under the new format, but the two candidates running were two previous mayors, both of whom were well identified with their parties, and it really became a partisan race between the two of them. I ran with no partisan identity and focused on bringing people from all areas of the political spectrum together to focus on a handful of key issues, find the common ground that we could work together on, in particular around making Tulsa a more economically competitive city, reinstilling a spirit of high expectations for people who live in our community, and addressing one of the greatest challenges we face, which is a life expectancy disparity between the city, part of our city that is most predominantly African-American, and the rest of the city. And ran against my predecessor, who ran a very partisan campaign, and we never ran a single negative ad. We focused on that positive message. And a key thing for us in that campaign, I knew I was running that we would have to turn out young voters. And we had a theory that young voters don't necessarily feel the same obligation to vote that maybe previous generations do. And so if they are faced with what you usually see in a partisan context, which is two candidates trying to convince you that they are the least bad of two bad options, then young voters just don't turn out to vote. They don't feel like they've got to vote for a bad option. They want to vote for a positive message. And so we focused on that. We doubled young voter turnout in that election by having a positive campaign that was nonpartisan in focus. And then when I came in as mayor, we built a nonpartisan team. In fact, the Tulsa World did a story on our team about a year after I was in, and I didn't even know this because we didn't track who was in what party. In my mayor's office staff, if I remember correctly, I think we had 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 independents. So truly just people focused on the great issues that face our city and bringing a diversity of viewpoints to find common ground that we could focus on together to make Tulsa the kind of city that most people want it to be. I should also mention, and I think this is so important when we talk about these kind of elections, because let me fast forward. I mean, this is the case in that election, but I would say it was even more exacerbated when I ran for re-election in 2020. I again ran as a nonpartisan candidate. I had 2 main opponents. One opponent who was very much working to claim the right-wing vote in the campaign, and another opponent who was working hard to claim the left-wing vote in that campaign. And on election, and there were a lot of people that assumed we would go to a runoff because of that. And the reality is we continue to focus on the center, believing that most people want people to work together. And in this case, I was a candidate that was running that was supportive of law enforcement, but was also supportive of masking regulations in the middle of the pandemic. And we won by the largest landslide in 30 years in the history of Tulsa, in the middle of maybe one of the most challenging environments for any candidate since the late 1960s. So I think that proved out that when given the option of a nonpartisan option where they're focused on the issues that really matter to people, the center holds. And so to your other question that I think is critical for what we've seen now that we're, over a decade into this in Tulsa, is that, our city council, and I served on it for 8 years. I love the city council because you're taking 9 people from our city council is divided up by geography. Each council represents about 45,000 people. So you're pulling 9 people with totally different life experiences and political beliefs, and really the only thing they share in common is that they all want Tulsa to be as good as it can be for the people they care about. And you ask them to make really complicated, high-level decisions in a very transparent environment. And I will say, before we had this switch, there was almost like this sense among us that there was a necessity to have partisanship introduced into those conversations. Since we switched over to having nonpartisan elections, and by the way, in our elections, you can identify in any party you want if you think that's advantageous to you. But by making that switch, we shifted the focus of the people who are the elected officials to the issues rather than what political party they happen to be in. And that has made all the difference in the discussions that we have at City Hall. And we have very strong debates and heated debates, but they're not about calling somebody a name because they're in one political party or another. They are about about where your position is on a specific policy issue. So I think the benefit, and by the way, I'm talking about Tulsa, my colleague over in Oklahoma City, David Holt, he has seen the exact same thing happen over there. And both of our cities are thriving right now. And I attribute a lot of that to the fact that our local governments are focused on policy and not partisanship. So I'm talking a lot about a nonpartisan nature. I realize in some open primaries, you have partisanship introduced into it. But for me, I think the common thread there is when you can open up competition to everybody and you're not competing for, 50.1% of maybe 50.1% of the population, then when you open up, you have greater competition. I'm a big believer that when you have more competition, you get better end results, whether that's in elections or in the marketplace or anywhere else. Competition breeds better results and a better end product. So I think we have definitely seen that here in Tulsa.
Have you seen also a change? So you described your campaign as striking out in a new direction and a more inclusive direction, bringing people together. Have other people running for city council, have they said, oh, I'm going to learn something from GT, I'm going to go that direction as well? Or are you kind of still an outlier in that?
Oh, no. That's one thing I've been really pleased to see. A lot of people have been elected to the city council in Tulsa in this time with using that exact same platform. You really don't. I'm trying to think, to be honest with you, the only people I can think of that have tried to wave the partisan flag in their election or in their campaigns have lost, which is interesting. Now, I hadn't thought about it before you asked that conversation. But I think that again speaks to the fact that voters don't want this sort of rah-rah athletic team competition when you're talking about stuff that impacts people's daily lives. And to be fair to my colleagues at the federal level, the political parties were set up to deal with federal issues and differences on federal policy. I've got Bernie Sanders people and Donald Trump people working together on how we make streets better in Tulsa or improve the quality of our parks or build better amenities for the citizens of Tulsa or staff our police department. The national partisan differences, I don't think are as applicable at a local level. That's one reason I'm a big believer that local government is one of the great hopes for the country.
So let me dig a little deeper there. Let me play devil's advocate for a minute. So what you're describing is the benefits of a system that lets all voters vote, that really minimizes partisan division and creates a context in which people can come together to solve problems. And that it's working. It's working in Tulsa. It's working in Oklahoma City. It's working in most American cities. Most American cities have some version of what you have in Tulsa. Some people would say, yeah, that's fine for city government. But when you get to Congress, you need these hardened partisan systems, because that's where you have to deal with these divisive issues. And you need a partisan system at the federal level or the statewide level. What works at local government wouldn't necessarily work at a higher level. What do you say to that?
I'd say that's nonsense. I think that maybe made sense in the late 18th century when distribution of information on people running for office was incredibly challenging, if generally impossible. But with the information transmission network that you have in the 21st century, and you see this, by the way, anyway, today's national candidates are really their own brands. They are not beholden to the political parties like they might have been in decades past. They build their own brands, but they are still working within a partisan system, which in my opinion isn't necessary anymore. And when you look at other countries around the world, they do not, I think about like England, their parliament has lots of different parties that are splintered up and have different positions and divided. It's not two parties that you have to pick one or the other, and maybe you believe half of what they say and not the other half, but you're just beholden to voting for the candidates in that party. You have a greater diversity of choices. So I don't, again, I think it might have been necessary or valuable in a time where communication and information was less accessible than it is today. But today, I think just like, you could liken it to the distribution of media or even books. Today, if I want some super rare, hard to find book, like I did this morning, I can just go online and find it and order it, and it'll be at my house in 3 days. There were times when the parties were set up under our Constitution, or that form of government was set up, where people had no access to books at all. So I think we're just in a very different environment today than we were when that was originally established. And again, I think when you give people more choices, and the other key on this is, what are you incentivizing? There was a lot of attention focused at the end of last year on Warren Buffett's old business partner, Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger always used to talk about how you can never overvalue the importance of incentives to people. So let's look at, what are we incentivizing at different levels of government? Well, if at the local level, you're incentivizing candidates who are going to get your streets fixed and make sure that you have a safe city and that people have economic opportunity in your city, then you're going to have candidates that run for that. If you have a federal level where you're incentivizing whoever can get on cable news to trash the other party the most is the person who gets elected, then that's what you're going to end up with. That I think if you can incentivize candidates that get elected because of their positions on issues that reflect the voters in that area, and you do that through a competitive system, not blocking out people from competing within that system, I'm convinced you get a superior result, because we've seen that at a local level here.
That's fascinating. What it makes me think about, Mayor Bynum, is that I read this article a couple days ago about a quandary that the Republican Party of Florida is now in. They've been, both the Democratic Party of Florida and the Republican Party of Florida have been lockstep with their opposition to open primaries in Florida. But the Republicans are now realizing that Matt Gaetz, who is their kind of very, very kind of extremist congressperson, he could win a closed primary for governor in Florida, because it's only Republicans voting. You don't have to appeal to a broad base. He could get 20% of the vote in a 5-way, 6-way race and win. And then they're stuck with a candidate that has almost no general election appeal in the general election. And so they're having to like figure out, how do we maintain our opposition to open primaries, but make sure that someone like Matt Gaetz doesn't win? And that's a conundrum. And hopefully more and more people in the parties are going to recognize that the Tulsa system, the nonpartisan system, might actually help them nominate candidates that are popular with the general election.
Well, and I think that raises such a great point. Here in Oklahoma, we are overwhelmingly a Republican state. I don't think a Democrat presidential candidate has carried a single county in Oklahoma since Al Gore in 2000, and I think he carried one. Wow. So we're extreme, and I'm a Republican. I'm a registered Republican, but we're a highly Republican state. My issue is that if you have confidence that the things that you're standing for appeal to most of the people, then you should be okay with more competition. You should be okay with lowering the gates down there and allowing everybody to compete and win. If you have the winning message and you're confident in that as a party, then you should be comfortable with letting everybody vote at the same time, rather than having this sort of siloed system, which tends to lend itself to the extremes, in my experience.
I have I have like 40 more questions, but we don't have much time. I have 2 more questions that I want to ask you, and then I want to open it up because there's a lot of questions in the queue. And it goes to this. One of the things I've observed, and many people have observed, is that almost every issue, including reform, gets partisanized. So if you look at broadly, forget a specific policy, but you look at the issue of election reform, it's by and large seen as a center-left issue, a Democratic Party issue. And look at, the bill that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer introduced, H.R. 1. It went down in flames on a purely partisan lines. Democrats were for it, Republicans were against it. But when you look at the open primaries issue, the polling shows in Oklahoma, 69% of independents want open primaries, 63% of Democrats, 62% of Republicans. 63% of urban voters want it, 62% of rural voters want it. It seems like for some reason, and I don't know how, this issue of letting all voters vote, having a non-party based system, is not seen as a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. And in fact, a lot of our best spokespeople around the country come from the center right, not the center left. How do you think about how this issue, open primaries, has been able to prevent itself from being pigeonholed as a kind of a left issue or a right issue? It's attractive to a lot of people. What does that look like in Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think there's 2 key things there. So one, I think it is so important in your mind to separate normal everyday citizens from the political class. The political class are the folks who are parked on Twitter all day and in the Facebook comment section. They are the people who work within the parties, often who make their livelihoods from working within the parties, who find a great sense of identity from working within the parties. And there is no incentive for change with the political class. I think the percentages that you're talking about, though, are your normal everyday people. If you had been following Twitter in the summer of 2020, you would have thought that I was going to get crushed in my reelection campaign. Because the extremes, that's the problem with being in the center. Both of the extremes hate you. And so they were torching me on social media, but your normal everyday people who are at work or at school or raising their kids, who aren't camped out on social media all day, they were supportive of that centrist message. And so I think it's really important in shaping that messaging around open primaries to keep the focus on the people who are being the customers here, the customers are not the political class. The customers are the citizens who want more options in everything. Again, whether that's in business, whether that's in government, people want more options that they can select from, and they want silos broken down. I mean, that is the story of the success of the internet over the last 30 years. So that I think is one thing that I would throw out. The other, and you mentioned it, and I think it comes back to this, is that when people get concerned about or characterize this as a Democrat initiative, and I've heard from some folks in Oklahoma feel like this, oh, well, this is for the Democrats to get in on the government that the Republicans have effectively boxed them out of. And my response to that is, as a Republican, but if we have the better ideas, then we should not be afraid of this.
Right.
If we have the better candidates, we should not be afraid of this. If we have the better product, our customers are going to pick us. And we don't need an artificial silo to protect us. We can stand on our own. We shouldn't be afraid of this. In fact, this could be advantageous for us. And so I think that that is the other thing that I would ask people to keep in mind when encountering that kind of an argument.
Well, it seems also Margaret Kobos, who leads Oklahoma United, was sharing with me the latest voter registration stats. And this is just from the last month. Let me just pull these up real quick. You've got, just in January, 831 new Republican voters. The Democrats lost 517 voters, and 1,505 people registered as independent. So more people registered independent than Democrat and Republican combined. It's now about 20% of Oklahoma, but it's growing fast. Is this, and I know the state legislature, again, closed primary system at the state level, has like a 30% approval rating. Is there, like, do you see this rise of independent voters, this low approval ratings, as reflective of the rules of the game, or is it purely based on other factors? I don't want to make a correlation where one doesn't exist.
So I majored in political science and ethics at Villanova University. Only person I know with that combo.
Okay.
But I did my senior thesis on the involvement of young people in politics. And the research I did showed this fascinating trend line. You have the greatest generation come home from World War II. They see the consequences of involvement or non-involvement in politics and government, and they are involved in politics in record levels. That's, how you get John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon and Jerry Ford and George H.W. Bush. That whole generation gets engaged when they come back from the war. And then one of them, John F. Kennedy, gets elected president of the United States, gives his Ask Not address, inspires a whole generation of young Americans to view government as this noble calling. And it goes up even more, the involvement of young people in politics and government. And then you have Vietnam and then Watergate, and it just plummeted, and it has never recovered from that. And when I looked at that, I mean, that was discouraging to see that, but I thought, well, I have a hard time believing that, like, my generation are so much less involved in their communities than maybe the generations in the 40s and 50s were. And when I look, they're not. They are absolutely just as involved. But what happened was future generations of Americans since the 60s and the 70s have traded involvement in politics and government for nonprofit work, because they view nonprofit work as selfless and altruistic. They view politics and government as selfish and corrupt. And so I think what you're seeing with the growth in independent voter registration is the desire of more and more people to see politics and be involved in politics and government, not as some sort of zero-sum game between political parties. There is a desire to see government operate like a nonprofit, where people work together with a focus on outcomes and altruism and selflessness. So that is, and by the way, that's been the fundamental basis of the time that I have served in elected office here in the city of Tulsa. And as a mayor, I've told everybody, I don't view my job as a political job. where I'm using this to climb the ladder to do something else. I view myself as leading the largest nonprofit in Tulsa and governing it accordingly. And I think that speaks to the level of the margin of victory I had and the routine levels of high popularity that I've enjoyed. And by the way, and you mentioned this earlier, John, when I get together with other mayors around the country, whether it's the U.S. Conference of Mayors or other things, nobody gets together and talks about Republicans and Democrats. Everybody wants to know, what are you doing on homelessness right now? Like, how do we solve that? What are you doing on infrastructure? What's your wastewater strategy that you've got? How much are you investing in amenities that draw companies and people to your city? Those are the conversations. Again, a focus on policy and outcomes, not on this silly kind of partisan game that you see at other levels.
Yeah.
So all that to say, I think the numbers that you're seeing, and even here in Oklahoma, that is an outgrowth of a desire for people not to be affiliated with this game, but to be, they still want to be able to vote. They want to have a say, but they don't want to be associated with the gamesmanship that they see at a partisan level, especially I think at the national level.
Yeah. Boy, that would make a great study, is exploring the attitudinal links between the massive participation at the community level in nonprofits and independent voter registration, and explore that. It also, what you were saying makes me think about how, you know, back when John Kennedy said, ask not what you can do for your country or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That was kind of still consistent with party politics. There wasn't such a gap between that kind of selflessness and how the politics was organized. But now, like, that's not compatible. That attitude is not compatible with the current warfare that we see at the national level. Wow, you've given me a lot to think about. I want to open it up. Again, just a reminder, if you have a question for Mayor Bynum, go to the chat, type in your name, your state, and a one-sentence description of what you want to ask, and then that'll get plugged in, and I will call on you to ask your question. Our first question comes from Cindy Alexander in Oklahoma, who has a question about ranked choice voting. Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, thank you for calling on me. I really appreciate it. I would like to hear an explanation of the issue posed by top two primaries and the barrier to the ballot that results so that political parties that are in the political minority in a state or are from an alternate party don't get an opportunity to be on the general election ballot.
You have thoughts about that, Mayor?
Again, I don't, well, Cindy may know more.
Oh, you hit mute accidentally.
Got muted there. Cindy may know more about how that is set up. My understanding, one, I can speak to the way it is here in Tulsa, and I simplified it earlier. The way our system is set up, if somebody doesn't get over 50%, we keep going until, so if it's, you know, somebody gets 16%, and somebody gets 20%, those three candidates go on the general election ballot. So it's however many candidates it takes to get over 50% of the vote on the general or on the first round go to the runoff. In our state, if you're an independent, registered as an independent, you automatically go on the general election ballot if you have enough signatures. And that's why usually when we have our elections, you have, you know, your Republican candidate, your Democrat candidate, and then like 3 or 4 independent candidates, most of whom do not necessarily have that great a name ID or visibility because of the partisan apparatus that exists in support of the other two. But again, when I think a great example, and I know, John, you're familiar with this, in our last elections, our labor commissioner candidate, our incumbent labor commissioner, Leslie Osborne, been
Right.
very focused on working with people in all political parties in her work. And because of that, she was opposed by a candidate on the right who, when asked in a debate, couldn't even say what the labor commissioner does. But they went, they had to go to a runoff in the election. He took her to a runoff because she did not get over 50% of the vote in their primary. She just barely won the runoff. But then in the primary or in the general election, she got more votes than any candidate on the ballot in the general election, more than the governor or anyone else.
Right.
And I think that is because, again, she represented a centrist message and had a centrist constituency that appealed to both groups, but almost would never have ended up on the general election ballot because of our partisan primary system. So again, my belief is, and I know there's lots of different ways that you can do open primaries. I know I've seen some questions pop up about ranked choice and stuff like that. I'm no expert on which of those is best. I can just speak to what we've had here in Tulsa. I think the key thing, though, is giving voters the option to choose from anybody that's running so that they have a maximum range of options. And then all of those candidates are incentivized to appeal to the maximum number of voters, not just to a small subset of their own partisan party.
Great. I want to go now to Elaine Steffen from Wichita, Kansas, who has a question about efforts to partisanize local elections. Go ahead, Elaine.
Hi, I live in Wichita, Kansas, and just had the great opportunity to meet Mayor Holt at the Principals First Summit. But quick question: we've got, and I know other red states are experiencing this as well, where the legislature is trying to make nonpartisan races partisan. Do you have any advice for those of us advocating in the field on how to deal with that?
Yeah, that's such a great concern. And I think that the main thing for us and that I would advise on that is that local control is the big message there. The citizens in a community ought to be able to determine what system they use to elect their representatives within the general legal framework that we have in the United States. And so for the state government to dictate to a local community how you hold your elections seems completely at odds with this notion of local governance. So that would be one. The other is, again, I just can't emphasize it enough. And I do think this goes to the point John made earlier. And I use it all the time when speaking in particular to Republican audiences, is that we value capitalism. And that means valuing competition in the marketplace, not creating artificial protections or set-asides for one group or another, not picking winners and not government picking winners and losers, but maximizing the competitive marketplace. And that's what open primaries is really about. So I would emphasize that as well.
Yeah, and what Elaine is talking about, I was just talking to an activist in Tennessee, and there's been, a partisanizing of school board races there in Tennessee, and it's been disastrous because you have these closed primaries now for school board, and then in the general election, there's only one candidate on the ballot, and so you're literally disenfranchising 70, 80, 90% of the community. So anything we can do to push back is going to be really important. I have a question from Dan Bowling about whether you've engaged with members of the Nebraska legislature. Go ahead, Dan. Oh, you're on mute, Dan. You got to unmute yourself.
There we go. Okay. Yeah, I was reflecting on this
Dan,
brilliant.
Where are you from? Dan, where are you from?
From Bethesda, Maryland. I was reflecting on this great piece that Jeremy wrote on the Nebraska legislature that you all published. I recommend to everybody. And I didn't know if the mayor might have compared notes or brainstormed it all with the folks up in Lincoln, about the parallels between what you're trying to do at a local level and what they're doing statewide.
I personally have not, as John mentioned, Margaret Kobos, who I see is on here as well, is really leading the effort to change our statewide system here in Oklahoma. I don't know if Margaret has visited with the folks in Nebraska or not, but I have not personally.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, speaking of Margaret Kobos, that's who I want to go to next for both a question and an update. I turn it over to you, Margaret.
I did not know I was doing an update, but I'm happy to do it. Our little movement here has gained a lot of steam, and we are right now in the process of putting together partnerships that are capable of funding a petition very soon. So that's where we are right now. And so we have been talking with a lot of professionals in the field who have the skills and experience to do that. And we're very, very excited about that. I do have a question because I love my mayor and I love my city and we love our state. And what I am seeing is unfortunately a little bit of a dead end for a lot of great candidates and public servants. Mayor Holt, Commissioner Osborne, we have a lot of moderate centrist public servants who we would love to see stay in government and in some fashion. I'd like to know if the mayor has any thoughts on how open primaries might encourage new leaders to come into the system and retain the great ones that we love.
Well, you raise an interesting dynamic there, Margaret, because I mentioned earlier, I think I've won both of my races by over 15 points, and in my reelect, it was the largest margin of victory in 30 years. Mayor Holt was reelected, I believe, by the largest margin in the history of Oklahoma City just last year. And in both cases, and for those of you who don't, Mayor Holt's the mayor of Oklahoma City. Both of us have governed with this same kind of nonpartisan approach. Both of us enjoy extremely high popularity ratings in our cities, and both of us have been told that we could never win a statewide Republican primary because of that very fact, because we have not spent our time in office demonizing Democrats and independents, because we've spent our time in office focusing on finding common ground amongst everyone in our communities, and have enjoyed that large, broad, widespread popularity because of that approach, trying to develop a consensus amongst the broadest coalition of citizens, which is, again, what I think open primaries incentivizes candidates to do. But to your point, that if there's a next step in Oklahoma politics, either at the state or federal level, we would have to go through a partisan primary. And the general consensus is that we would not win that if we had a strong partisan candidate who has spent their time demonizing the other parties and not really doing much of anything else. So I do think that's a shame. I happen to think being mayor is the best job in politics, so I'm not really worried about running for anything else. But I think it's a shame for encouraging other people. And I do think it's a limiter on incentivizing people who want to pursue a career in elected office or a vocation in elected office. If you tell them, well, you can do great at the local level, but then after that, that's kind of the end of the road. I hate the notion that that is the conventional wisdom. How you change that, again, I think is by changing the system. If you have a system which is discouraging wildly popular candidates from being able to get elected, then something is wrong with the system.
Yeah.
And so again, I would go back to, that's a big reason I think it needs to change.
Mayor, we have a couple questions from Steve in New Jersey and Mike in Pennsylvania about engaging with existing politicians and legislators. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike in Pennsylvania to ask this question, both for himself and also for Steve in New Jersey. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor, thanks for your time today. It's really appreciated. So one of the challenges here in Pennsylvania is it's a large state, and it's pretty partisan at the legislature level. Most of the state, though, is rural, so we don't have city mayors outside of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia that we can, implement these kind of open primary reforms at the local level. So really the focus for us in Pennsylvania has to be the state legislature. Again, it's very partisan there. And so how do we, when these elected officials are really dependent on their parties to turn out the vote and fund their campaigns and so on, how do we convince them to reform the election law to allow open primaries when their parties are essentially telling them not to vote for that, and thus jeopardizing their reelection?
That's a great question. And I have to tell you a funny story as a sidebar. Again, I mentioned earlier, I went to college in Philly and was, as student body president at Villanova, was hosting James Carville, who came on campus to speak one time. And Carville was talking about working in Pennsylvania, and he goes, I won't do the accent y'all can imagine. He's like, I just love Pennsylvania. You got Philly on one side, Pittsburgh on the other, and Alabama in the middle. And I think that speaks to the challenging dynamics there in Pennsylvania, and very different voting populations. To your question, and I don't know what the laws are in Pennsylvania for initiative petitions, but what I have advised the folks in Oklahoma that are trying to advance this is not to waste your time with the legislature, to spend your time and strategy and energy and resources on getting enough signatures to put it directly on a ballot. And the reason for this is exactly what I pointed out earlier. If you're relying on the political class that is incentivized to maintain the status quo, you will not get anything changed. That the folks that are in your legislature have gotten there through the system that's there. There really is not, as with me as a city councilor at the time, there is not an incentive to change it. The people who want the change and who want more options are the non-political class. When you can go out and do an initiative petition and reach them and give them the chance to vote on it directly, I think, at least here in Oklahoma, I'm confident we will have a far greater chance of success going directly to the voters rather than relying on the state legislature. But again, that I understand that's different for every state. Every state has a different set of hurdles that you've got to go through. But that's been my advice to our team here in Oklahoma.
Just to add to that, because we've been very active in the campaign in Pennsylvania going back to 2016, because they don't have initiative and referendum in Pennsylvania. You have to work through the legislature, unfortunately. One of the things, we passed a bill 42-8 out of the Pennsylvania Senate for open primaries. Now, as Michael was saying, Pennsylvania is so partisan, that bill that passed 42-8 couldn't even get a hearing in the assembly. So it never was passed. But one of the things that the local team in Pennsylvania, and I think they've been doing a great job, is recognizing that there are elements, not a majority, but there are elements of both parties that are very dismayed about the fact that more and more legislators don't come to Harrisburg to get anything done. Because to your point, Mayor Bynum, they don't have any incentives to get anything done. They have incentives to cater to the 5% of people that got them elected. So the strategy in Pennsylvania has been, how do we leverage that? How do we leverage party leaders to say this is in your interest to have a more functional legislature, given how close elections are and given how many issues are bubbling up? But it's not a magic wand. It's still, the institutional resistance is very, very strong. We just have to kind of keep plugging away at that. That's how I think about it. Not just for Pennsylvania, but those states that don't have the initiative and referendum process.
And and again, you and Michael are going to know the lay of the land in Pennsylvania better than I do. I think one of the things that would give me, I think, a sense of optimism about the level of support that you would see for something like this. I think about, I don't know what Senator Fetterman's popularity rating is, but that's a guy who just got elected to the United States Senate, who really is not beholden to any political party, that is very much focused on representing his constituency. And that to me speaks to the presence and a desire amongst voters to have elected leaders like that. So if that's sort of a flag that would be up in the air to me as somebody who's not on the ground there, the fact that he just got elected to the Senate with that kind of a mindset and approach would be very encouraging.
Yeah, and the governor as well. The governor's been very outspoken in terms of his independence, and that being part of his brand. I want to close it out today with a question from Jack in Kansas City about how have your donors responded to you being a nonpartisan mayor? Go ahead, Jack.
Thank you. Yeah, that's basically how most candidates are judged nowadays. How's their coffers going? Do your donors get what you're doing, or are you having difficulty raising funds for re-elections?
It was the funniest thing. My first fundraiser, when I kicked off my mayoral campaign, I had the longtime fundraising chair for the county Democratic Party standing there right next to the finance chair for the state Republican Party at this fundraiser, and they were totally weirded out that they were at the same event together. And I think about that was like the first day of the campaign. The last night, this was one of those kind of moments that you never forget. In any campaign, those of you who've worked in campaigns would know this. The last night, you wait until the sun goes down, and then you go out and put all your signs in the rights of way and illegal locations all over the city. And so we had been out doing that for several hours, went back to campaign headquarters. We were drinking some beers, and we had people who never worked on campaigns together, who were very active political operatives, but in different political parties. I'm talking libertarians, Democrats, Republicans, independents. And one of these guys is sitting there and he's like, usually I'd be out there, and he looks at this guy across the table from him. I'd usually be out tearing down your signs and putting mine up. And the other guy was like, yeah, I know, you jerk. And then everybody laughed, and they're like, I hate that this is the last time we get to do this together. And it was a reminder that the people that love their community and want to make a difference often, if given the opportunity, work together and on a common cause. But so long as we have this system that incentivizes them to be separated, that's the paths they go down. And so to answer your question, I have had no problem raising funds utilizing this approach. We have vastly outspent my opponents in each of my races. And honestly, if I'm going to be cynically political here for a second as a politician, and thinking about just from a pure political strategy standpoint, it's a lot more money to raise if you're raising it from people in both parties rather than just one. And you, of course, have to have a message and a commitment that appeals to people in both parties. But when you do, you can raise a whole lot more money. And we did. And so I think to your question, it's actually advantageous to candidates, again, to appeal to the broadest range of people that they can and not just rely on one subset of one political party to get them elected.
Wow, I never thought of that. That's really interesting. We've run out of time. I know you're on a tight schedule, so I'm going to let you go, Mayor. Just a quick announcement for everybody here today. I would encourage all of you to get connected to what's going on in Oklahoma, to this movement that Margaret Kobos has been leading for a number of years right now. You can sign up at her website at Oklahoma United. It's ok-united.org. Even if you don't live in Oklahoma, sign up to get the updates and stay connected to that. It's a really important movement and campaign that's emerging. And Margaret is one of the top leaders of this issue in the country, and everybody should know what she's doing. So thank you, Mayor Bynum. Thank you all for joining us. We have some great upcoming events. Nick Troiano next month, and many more. So we'll see you very soon. Thank you.